Hello and what's up everybody? Here again after a long while. Today we will be continuing with Pompey the Great, continuing from page 36, which is where we stopped last time. Um, I would also like to say that finally today, after this reading, we will be going to read. I'm going to be reading for you uh The Republic of Plato. So be around for that. I have the book over here actually. Here it is. So yeah, be around for that. Anyways, let's get to it. Sorry, 1 second. Let me just. I need to. I will be very fast. Sorry. Um, I just need to send this to somebody, and then after we'll get to it. uh, okay, let's go. Let's begin, shall we? Okay. Let's see, is anyone else entering? No? Okay. Let's begin. Oh, sorry. This isn't right. Okay. Let me know if you can see me well. Okay. He he also had the most telling experience of all, in that the soldiers were undoubtedly loyal to him, and could be manipulated for his own good if he so wished. He could not underestimate his own. Sorry. Let's begin from the last page where we stopped. Sorry. So sorry to stop there. He had his first taste of independent action outside Rome, without the reference to the Senate, and the fortunate experience of winning wars and making administrative and diplomatic decisions, which on this occasion do not seem to have been challenged. He also had the most telling experiences of all, in that the soldiers were undoubtedly loyal to him, and could be manipulated for his own good if he so wished. He cannot underestimate his own talents in this connection. He cannot underestimate be have underestimated his own talents in this connection, nor the undoubted power that could accrue from this association of victorious general and loyal armies. As well as hailing him Imperator, the soldiers called him the Great. Magnus the Great, a name that he carried to his death. The occasion may not have been totally unprompted, since Pompey liked to flaunt his physical resemblance to Alexander the Great, and the addition of the name could only enhance this affinity. Pompey, shrewd enough to realize that once the campaign in Africa was over, he would be redundant, unless he could find another command to exercise his military talents. He could not have imagined that he was strong enough to challenge Sulla in an attempt to take over the state, despite the loyalty of his soldiers. That was not his aim, either on this occasion nor on any other. But nor was it his intention to disappear into obscurity. He was perhaps quite prepared for his recall when it came. Sulla ordered to send back to Italy his 5 or 6 legions, and to remain in Africa with one legion until a replacement could be sent out as governor. The implication was that when his successor arrived, Pompey would return to Rome alone, leaving his one legion behind as garrison troops. By the time he arrived in Rome, the rest of his army could have been disbanded or sent elsewhere. His command would be a dead letter, and he would not be able to hold triumph. He imparted this news to his troops, whose protests reached riotous proportions. The soldiers said that they would go to Italy only with Pompey at their head. Pompey put on a display of emotion, the value of which he had learned when he prevented the mutiny of Strabo's camp. He shed tears and retired to his quarters, only to be brought back out again. The soldiers begged him to lead them to Rome. He in turn begged them not to lead him into open rebellion. So it went on all day until Pompey threatened to commit suicide rather than induce the rebel to rebel. When he retired to bed that night, Pompey was probably highly pleased with the scenario that had just been enacted. It was a demonstration to Sulla, to whom it would be reported of what he would he could do if he so sorry. It was a demonstration to Sulla, to whom it would be reported of what he could do if he so desired, and that he had complete control over his troops, which was a two-edged sword. It meant I can stop them or I can start them, whichever I choose. The main effect of this riotous behavior was an even stronger demonstration that Pompey was not foolish enough to try anything against the state or against Sulla. The demonstration paid off. Sulla was allowed to return home to Italy with his army. When Sulla met him, he hailed him as the troops in Africa had done, as Magnus, thereby giving his approval and contributing to the perpetuity of the name. His splendid reception may have encouraged Pompey to insist upon holding a triumph. It cannot have been the first time that he thought of it. Without it, his achievements would remain unacknowledged by the multitude, and that much more easily forgotten. Sulla countered with the obvious objection. Pompey was an equestrian, not a senator, and was 6 years short of the required age to become a senator. Triumphs were reserved for senators, and then not just any senators. They had to be men of praetorian or consular rank, and though Pompey had been appointed with propraetorian powers, he was not eligible to hold a triumph. It was galing, no doubt galing to be reminded that although he was elig- eligible eligible to command several legions and to fight battles for Rome at personal risk, he was not to eligible to celebrate his victories in public or to allow his soldiers to celebrate with him. His famous reply to Sulla was probably fueled by frustration and anger, though some would construe it as pet- petulant, petulance. At first Sulla did not hear what he said, but the amazement on the faces of his associates alerted him to the fact that Pompey had just overstepped the mark. Sulla asked him to repeat what he said, and once again Pompey reminded him that more people worshipped the rising than the setting sun. There was probably there was a silence. Then Sulla burst out, "Let him triumph! Let him triumph!" He had probably mentally run through the responses open to him. Punishment would seem churlish and only tarnish his own reputation, and would possibly stir up trouble among Pompey's troops. Indulgence would simply mean that Pompey would parade through the streets in a chariot with his face painted red, followed by his soldiers as he approached the capital and dedicated his spoils of war to the gods. It would not mean that Pompey's next move would be to take over the state or usurp Sulla's own position. Sulla judged the young man correctly in that he wanted glory and recognition but not supreme power. There were two disappointments to the deal with before Pom- with be- to deal with before Pompey held his triumph. The first was he had arranged for his triumph for his chariot to be drawn by elephants, but in practice run he found that they were too big to pass through the city gates. Allegedly, he tried on two separate occasions. Perhaps he had ordered smaller elephants in the end. Smaller elephants. In the end, he had to accept that he would have to appear in horse-drawn chariot, like the ordinary man. Perhaps it is just as well, since he would have looked ridiculously minuscule behind two such large beasts. The second problem was near mutiny of his troops, at least among the disruptive elements among them. The men had been stirred up to demand more pay. They had two main bargaining tools if their demands were not met. Firstly, they refused to march in the parade, and secondly, they threatened to seize the booty from the wars and divide it up between them. They miscalculated if they thought the vanity would force Pompey to capitulate on this issue. He made it plain that he would go for ego, the triumph, rather than submit to coercion. Frontinus reports Frontinus report Frontin- Front Frontinus reports that he flung the fasces ra, flung the fasces wrapped in laurel to the soldiers and told them to begin their theft of the booty by stealing those. This mistreatment of the severed symbols of authority made the soldiers ashamed of what they had done, and they backed down. By his determined common sense action, Pompey earned considerable credit from both friends and enemies alike. The triumph may have been held in 81, though no one can really be sure of the year, since the ancient authors, none of them exact contemporaries, cannot agree on Pompey's age. According to the various sources, he was anywhere between 23 and 26, which sets the date for the triumph between 82 and 79. The latter date has been ruled out, but the choice between the others is not so clear. All that is known for sure is that it was held in March. Stakes, Pompey was probably the most eligible young man in Rome. No one could imagine that after this triumph he was going to retire to his estates and fade into obscurity. On his part, a good marriage alliance with with the right with the right clans would help him in his future career. His association with the Metelli that had ended when the unfortunate Aemilia died, was now renewed by his marriage to Mucia, whose half brothers were Quintus Caecilius Metellus Celer and Quintus Caelius Metellus Nepos. The marriage may have been happy in so far as these political associations went. Mucia produced three children for Pompey, a daughter and two sons, who were to carry on the war against Caesar after their father's death. Pompey's main problem after his triumph was to identify where his career was to take him. He had begun as an anomaly, and was to remain anomalous all his life. He was too young to hold any meaningful office, and could not contemplate with the transition from the commander of armies to an administrative post concerned with routine tasks. Sulla was prepared to let him bend the rules up to a point, so with his blessing, Pompey had become the youngest ever and the only equestrian triumphator. Bless, but when it came to political influence, Pompey was not to be the exception to the rule. The strict regulations as to the age, restrictions for each magistracy, and the concomitant stipulation that there should be a specific number of years between tenure of posts had been reinforced when Sulla executed Ofella because he intended to stand as candidate, consular candidate while still underage and without having held any prior office. Deprived of any hope of reaching the consulship himself for many years, in 79 Pompey supported a candidate for the consulship for the following year. This was Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, eminently eminently unsuitable as far as Sulla was concerned, except in except in so far he was of the correct age and fulfilled all the required criteria. He had held the requisite offices in line with Sulla's dictate that the quaestorship and the praetorship should precede the consulship. Sulla could not oppose his candidacy on any of these counts, and would therefore have no have no have to and would therefore have to oppose it simply because he did not approve of Lepidus' ideals and character, and that would have made him the tyrant that his the detractors said he was. Sulla's legislation could endure that no one reached the consulship without the necessary experience and maturity, but no amount of laws could guard the republic against the character and intentions. As for Pompey, there is no clear reason why he supported Lepidus, who had made no secret of his anti-Sullan stance. It is not recorded that there was any that there was already a serious branch between Pompey and Sulla, and there is no evidence that Pompey ever wished to turn against his benefactor. Seeger suggests that Pompey's motives were purely personal, and the characteristical devious characteristically devious in that what he saw the election of Lepidus and the implementation of his policies as a potential flashpoint that would necessitate oh man, why these words that would necessitate the restoration of order by someone in command of troops, a role that he had earmarked for himself. It is possible that Pompey had begun to think that Lepidus as consul could offer more than Sulla as dictator, because he could find no means of circumventing the limitations on his political career with regard to the holding of offices in the correct succession, with the relevant number of years between them. The age restrictions alone would exclude him from any prestigious or influential position for some considerable time, and though Sulla's insistence on upholding his own laws, even with regard to his friends, is understandable and even necessary, Pompey's situation was in status unless he could find employment or a post of some kind. Since none of Lepidus's dealings with Pompey has been preserved, this conjecture remains impeccable of proof. The implication is that Pompey was duped by Lepidus, or that he had seriously misjudged his character, especially since he soon found after the elections that the association with the new consul was hazardous. But it is quite possible that Pompey was looking for something simpler than revolution, in that he imagined that Lepidus would be able to further his career in some way. Sulla had tried to warn Pompey before the elections, and afterwards he castigated him in public. If he had originally included Pompey in his will, he now removed all trace of his name from it, so that so that of all Sulla's associates, Pompey was the only one who was thus excluded. When he met Pompey in the Forum, Sulla warned him to look out for himself, because he had just helped to raise a man who was really an enemy to a more powerful position than himself. Lepidus, Lepidus's colleagues in the consulship was already staunchly conservative. Quintus Lautatius Catulus conservat, was staunchly conservative. Was the staunchly sorry. Lepidus's colleague in the consulship was the staunchly conservative Quintus Lutatius Catulus, but he was not strong enough to curb Lepidus's proposals. Sulla himself did not take any action against Lepidus, either before or after his election. If he exerted the undoubted power that he had held while dictator, and could still call upon when he had resigned, Lepidus would be elevated from martyrdom, and then there would be more men like him to step into his place. Sulla would not always be there to guard against such disruptive elements, or to select and reject suitable consular candidates. The government that he had set up and fortified would have taken its chance with such circumstances in the future. For the time being, Sulla contented himself with a sort of gentleman's agreement, persuading two con- consuls contended him, persuading the two consuls to swear on oath that they would not settle any quarrels by violent means. Sulla was approaching his voluntary retirement, probably not undertaken on a sudden whim. In his public speeches, Lepidus reminded the people of Sulla's crimes, wondering if retirement as a private citizen would be wise for a former dictator who had been responsible for so many deaths. Sorry. But Sulla proved him wrong. At some unknown date before the middle of 79, or possibly even earlier, he abdicated, and contrary to Lepidus's predictions, he survived, presumably because his real power lay in his great following of his discharged soldiers and a large number of freedmen called the Cornelii, who owed everything to him. Killing Sulla for revenge would have to be the act of a suicidal aspirant for martyrdom. In any case, it was obvious in 78 that those who wished for Sulla's death would not have to wait long. He went to live at one of his villas on the coast, where his demise was prolonged and horrific. He developed ulcers that would not heal, perhaps from internal abscess, possibly as a result of syphilis. He had led a a debauched life that exceeded the bounds of anything that most Romans could dream of. Whatever it was that killed him, it was relentless, merciless, and undignified. The proposal for state funeral for Sulla was nearly defeated by Lepidus, if he had carried the day. By Lepidus. If he had carried the day, there would have carried the day, there would have been no honors and no cremation in the Campus Martius. Lepidus's colleagues Catulus opposed him, with the assistance and determination of Pompey, a funeral was arranged. It was all the more noble since Pompey had received nothing from Sulla's will, but despite his snub, Pompey took charge of the proceedings with his flair for organization and administration. The funeral was a memorable occasion, attended by virtually everyone in Rome, because no one dared to reveal his descent. Sulla's veterans paraded through the streets to conduct the the beer through the forum, where speeches were made, and then to the campus Martius. It is Pompey's credit that the soldiers did not riot, nor did stir up to make any demonstration on his own behalf. By backing Catullus over the funeral, Pompey had nicely detached himself from Lepidus. But if he was not attached to Lepidus, he was still no more firmly attached to the Senate, and without Sulla to utilize his talents and secure his advancement, he badly needed a special project to keep him in the public eye, rising ever upwards in dignity and status. Even though Sulla was no longer there to enforce his laws, it would be difficult for Pompey to persuade the senators to take him seriously as a politician, especially since the recently strengthened Senate owed its preeminence to the dictator. A young man in his twenties with a penchant for military command could be utilized, but only if the circumstances required military action, and since he had little chance of of start starting out on a political career unless he began at the beginning. It was only through military action that Pompey could hope to rise to a position of importance, preferably in a command that was bestowed on him via the approval legal process. Fortunately, Lepidus played into his hands quite soon, so soon in fact that it supports the accusation that Pompey backed Lepidus for the sole reason that he could foresee that he would be guaranteed to cause trouble that would require suppression. But this is perhaps stretching the young man's perception too far. Lepidus's track record up to now had been one of twists and turns, never consistently adopting either a Marian or Sullan stance, but opportunely following in whichever direction the prevailing winds blew. After Sulla's death, he came into his own as an avowed anti-Sullan, still not fully committed to the Marian cause, but wholly dedicated to the furtherance of his own interests. He perhaps had not planned his career in minute detail, only until opportunity presented itself, for there were many causes for him to cha- to champion. Even while Sulla still lived, there was issues that could have been fought for. But after his death, it was no doubt easier for the discontented, and disinherited, for the discontented and the distant, disinherited to convince themselves that reckoning and recompense were within reach. Lepidus took up the challenge. There were exiles from the Marian party to be recalled, the families of the proscribed men to be restored to their original status, and corn doles for the people to be reinstalled. There was also the promise of restoration of tribunician power, guaranteed to bring popularity to the man who achieved it. The most threatening source of discontent came from outside Rome. Sulla had settled his veterans on lands in Etruria and elsewhere, which were wrested by force from the original inhabitants, who now saw the removal of Sulla as an opportunity to regain their farms without the risk of coordinated punishment. The situation was seriously verging on civil war, so the Senate dispatched both consuls to deal with the problem. Both Lepidus and Catulus recruited armies, since they were not noted for their sympathetic attitudes to each other. The Senate forbade them to use these forces against each other. Lepidus attracted many Marian sympathizers because it seemed that he was dedicated to the suppression of Sulla's governmental machinery. To the rebels who were trying to regain their lands, it seemed that Lepidus was their savior, especially when he sent le- his legate Junior Brutus to recruit troops among the Gauls on both sides of the Alps. He was legally entitled to do so because he had been allocated Transalpine and Cisalpine Gaul as a proconsular province in 77 after his consulship ended. The last page. If you're watching, leave a comment in the chat if you want. It's the last page we're going to now, and then after in around 30 minutes, we will read on another live reading, The Republic of Plato. No one can be certain of the exact point in the proceedings at which Lepidus decided upon armed insurrection. As the events unfolded, it might have seemed to onlook to onlookers that he had intent upon it all along, but it may simply be the case that he seized his opportunity because he saw that there would never be a better one. Whilst Catulus was also in the field at the head of troops, there was some check on Lepidus's activity. However, when the time came to hold the consular elections for the following year, and both consuls were summoned back to Rome to oversee them, Catulus obeyed, but Lepidus remained with his army. It is questionable whether he was committed to the cause of disposed farmers, or whether he merely used the rebellion as a vehicle to put himself at the head of an army with which to threaten Rome. For that is the course he took, marching on the city and demanding a second consulship. Lepidus may have intended to initiate many high-minded projects for which he needed the sort of continuity of power that Sulla acquired. But if not, if so, then these ideas have escaped the record without benefit of any knowledge of his plans or his mindset. His schemes seem to be somewhat hysterical and harebrained, and his demand was preposterous. The Senate was hardly likely to succumb without at least an attempt at opposition. It was Marcius Philippus who was the driving force behind the Senate, urging that Senatus Consultum Ultimum, literally the meaning the last decree, should be passed to empower Catulus to move against his consular colleagues. As consul already in possession of an army, Catulus was the obvious choice of commander to lead an expedition against Lepidus. But since he was not especially gifted in military sphere, and since there were two enemies to deal with, the one near Rome and the other in the north of Italy, Pompey was the obvious choice to lead another army against the Gallic troops under Junius Brutus. The Senate acquired Pompey's appointment, but it is not elucidated precisely what his rank and power were to be. Most likely he was to assume praetor rank, as he had in Sicilian and African commands, but neither this nor his relationship to Catulus is stated, with the result that it is possible to argue, on the one hand, that he was to operate independently, or on the other, that he was to subordinate to Catulus. While Catullus faced Lepidus, who was marching on Rome, Pompey soon had Brutus under siege at Mutina, modern Modena. Allegedly, he negotiated a surrender on the grounds that he would write to the Senate and accept the terms imposed on him with regard to his adversary. Brutus was imprisoned, awaiting the verdict, and Pompey did in fact write to the Senate, but the next day either something happened that caused him to change his mind, or he treacherously went back on his word. He had Brutus assassinated, supposedly trying to escape, as he reported in a second letter to the Senate. It may have been true that Brutus attempted to flee, but the execution did nothing to enhance the reputation of the boy butcher, and probably most people received the escape story as modern readers would take it in the phrase slipped on a bar of soap. The chronology of the battles in the north and the fighting for the possession of Rome is variously interpreted. It may have been that Pompey's news of his success reached Rome before Catullus met Lepidus in combat. Lepidus's troops forced Catullus back from the Milvian bridge, but once he had penetrated as far as Campus Martius, he was overwhelmed. And I think that will be it. I mean, let me just. There are two people right now. If you just arrived, let me know if okay, two people left. Okay. Let let me know if you want me to read another page or if we should finish now. I don't know. It's up to you. Let me know in the chat if you want to continue or not. I'm good either way. Is it possible? Are you? If not, okay. I'll just. No one's leaving any message, but there are two people here. If you want, leave a message in the chat if you want me. But I'll continue from here and then get to a good end because this wasn't very good. Shall we continue? Okay, I'll just continue. He fled Rome and then from Italy, a declared enemy of the people and the estate and the Senate, though and a declared enemy of the people and the Senate, though this official declaration did not take place until late in the proceedings, when he was approaching the city. His life came to an end in Sardinia. He was a disappointed man. The final straw was to the news that his wife had been unfaithful to him. Perperna rounded up the remaining soldiers and headed for Spain, where he joined Sertorius. Where was it? Now that the danger had been averted, Pompey's troops were no longer necessary, so he ought to have disbanded his army and returned to Rome, where he would have been the hero of the moment, lauded, celebrated, and feasted, and then made redundant. But he had his sights set on something more, so he kept his troops together despite the request or possibly the orders of Catullus to pay them off. He kept making excuses while his friends worked on the Senate on his behalf. It could be considered that he intended to seize power and therefore represented a real threat to Rome, but this is unlikely. He was bluffing, and if his bluff had been called, nor or even if he had not up, he had not if he did not obtain what he had wanted quite quickly, he would have been compromised for no real gains. He had just relieved Rome from the threat of armed insurrection, and yet seemingly he now posed the same threat himself. But domination was not his style, nor now or ever, and especially at this juncture, he was not prepared for it. What Pompey was what Pompey wanted was another military command, and there was a ready-made need for one in Spain, where Metellus Pius had made little headway against the rebel Sertorius. It is not certain whether Metellus had asked for help. Some authorities think he may have done so, and if that is the case, then Pompey would probably have had his his complete support as the best general to go to Spain and fight at his side, though there is no evidence that Metellus had actually asked the Senate to send him. Once again, the proposal that bestowed on Pompey his next command originated with L. Marcius Philippus. It was the third time that support and encouragement had risen from the same source, starting starting at the time of the lawsuit against Pompey, just after the death of Strabo. Philippus was a survivor who had begun opposing Sulla. When Sulla came to power, he joined the regime seamlessly, but after Sulla's death, he was not noted as a staunch follower of Sullan policies. He can be censored for lack of principle and loyalty, acting purely in his own interests. Or on the other hand, he can be seen as a man of common sense, acting on behalf of Rome. Gelser calls him a realist. Philippus would agree with the sentiments of Talleyrand, who survived the French Revolution, the Napoleonic regime, and the restoration of the kings. In his opinion, there was and is nothing wrong with accepting positions in times of crisis and revolution. When the absolute good is impossible to achieve because one must move on, considering not only the present but also what will be. Philippus may have been in communication with Pompey for some time before his proposal to send the young general to Spain. What? Huh? Okay, 1 second. Gelser calls him a realist. Philippus, who would have agreed with the sentiments of Talleyrand, who survived the French Revolution and the Napoleonic regime, and the restoration of the kings. In his opinion, there was is nothing wrong with accepting positions in times of crisis and revolution. When the absolute good is impossible to achieve because one must move on, considering not only the present but also what will be. Where was I? Okay. Philippus may have been in communication with Pompey for some time before his proposal to send the young general to Spain was presented to the Senate. Otherwise, the events must have attributed to spontaneity and the opportunism on the part of Pompey, and in refusing to disband his troops, and on the part of Philippus in sudden thinking how suitable Pompey as would be as an adversary of Sertorius, especially since neither of the two consuls nor any of the other magistrates or ex-magistrates showed any inclination to go to war. The reluctance was so marked that Philippus honed his reputation as a wit as a wit from the circumstances. He was challenged about sending Pompey to Spain with proconsul proconsular power. He replied that no, he was not. When he was challenged about sending Pompey to Spain with proconsular power, he replied that no, he was not proposing to proconsul, send him proconsul, but proconsulibus, and on behalf of the consuls, on, consuls, underlining the fact that neither of them wanted to take on the task, nor indeed was suited for it. Pompey set out as soon as possible for Spain, but spent his first campaigning season carving his way through the Alps into Gaul, the only into Gaul. The only source for his activities in this year derived from Sallust, in his version of the letter that Pompey wrote to the Senate at the end of the operations of 75. In his asking for supplies and for reinforcements, Pompey reminded the Senate of his past services, including his passage through the mountains the establishment of a new road, and the conquest of the tribes controlling the passes into Gaul and in Gaul itself. He claimed to have conquered Gaul and overcome many strongholds, even the allowances for gross exaggeration. It seems that there were serious problems that took a long time to overcome. There are few details besides the information obtained in this letter, but the Romans never gained complete control of the Alps until the reign of Augustus, so Pompey's account is probably not too exaggerated. Once he arrived in Spain, Pompey found a position of stalemate. Sertorius had embedded himself securely in the country, recruiting Roman settlers and native Spaniards from their various tribes. He set up a school for the sons of the tribal chiefs, so that they could be educated as Romans. Though he was a rebel as far as Rome was concerned, his regime in Spain was throughout thoroughly Roman, with a senate and Roman magistrates. Though he utilized the country and its inhabitants, he did so within Roman framework, but it was his own charismatic leadership that enabled him to maintain his strength for so long. He had fought hard to gain a foothold, initially having been driven out by sullen forces sent across the Pyrenees. He made an abortive attempt to establish himself in Africa, but finally settled upon Spain as his theater of operations. When he returned there from Africa, he took up the cause of Lusitanians, who had long been engaged in struggle against the Roman governors who opposed them. In other words, they indirectly opposed to the regime of Sulla. It may seem odd that the Lusitanians would shrug off Roman control only to accept another Roman as their leader, but Sertorius was careful to avoid the oppressive methods of the previous governors. He ended the exploitation of resources and the vicious taxation, and came to a successful understanding with the ruling classes. In this way he was able to win over most of the tribes and cities of northern Spain, but he was implacable against those that opposed him. For the Spanish tribes and townsmen there was little choice in the struggle between the two opposing Roman forces. If they embraced the cause of one side, then they automatically incurred the enmity enmity of the other. Neutrality was not an option, because while the Romans chased each other over wide-ranging areas of the country, using food supplies and other resources, a refusal to assist or to give up supplies invited immediate retribution, and also the loss of the supplies taken by force. But on the other hand, ready cooperation signified partisan activities and invited punishment by the opposing force. And that's, I think, it. I'll show you now the area in which they were battling over there, Pompey and what's his name? Serturius. In Spain, there's a map over here showing the area. So Pompey came from down here And then after they were in this area, like battling over here in the villages and close to villages and stuff like that, so they can take resources from there. Well, that was good. And in 15 minutes around, I will be back again to read The Republic of Pompey. So in 15 minutes, I'll be back again on another live to read The Republic of Pompey. Anyways, hope you enjoyed the reading. Have a great rest of the day if I don't see you in the other live, and bye bye.